John Carmack and John Romero finally had their dream jobs. They were making video games for a living. They had the best hardware, the best work environment, and they were doing what they loved doing. Something that very few people could say about themselves. But as time went on, they would eventually realize that Softdisk and Gamer's Edge was a dead end. They couldn't just leave Softdisk. They had to escape. This is how they did it. For a couple of nights, John Carmack had his head wrapped around the issue of smooth scrolling. Side-scrollers were the cash cow of the late 80s, but no one could create smooth scrolling graphics for computers. Nintendo's home console was able to accomplish this with specialized hardware. The NES had a custom-made picture processing unit designed specifically to render the game's graphics on your TV. The typical computer of the time, the IBM PC compatible, had a single, beefy processor that does everything. Even though computers had the more powerful and expensive hardware under the hood, the system's architecture was not designed for rendering graphics on the screen. In layman's terms, the NES can do smooth scrolling gameplay, and computers struggled with it. Whoever can bring the smooth scrolling gameplay to the PC would make a fortune, and John Carmack solved the puzzle. The problem was the entire screen was always being redrawn, every single pixel in every single frame. The solution was optimization. Have the program do less work. If a blue pixel from the sky is still blue in the next frame, why take the time to redraw it? Have the program redraw only the parts that change. The night he figured this out, Tom Hall was staying later than usual, and it was just the two of them at the office. After seeing the scrolling effect, Tom was pumped. He wanted to recreate the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3. So they both worked late into the night, put it on a disk, and left it on Romero's desk. When Romero came in the morning, he ran the program on the disk, and he lost it. He could not believe what he was seeing. The first level of Super Mario Bros. 3 scrolling on a PC. He showed it to people around the office, but the responses were less than favorable. No one actually cared. No one understood what the big deal was. Back in the Gamer's Edge office, Romero wanted the team to ditch Softdisk and create their own company. There was another man in the conversation, Jay Wilbur, a friend of Romero, who got him the job at Softdisk. His idea was to arrange a deal with Nintendo to port Super Mario Bros. 3 to the PC. To make this happen, they had to overcome two obstacles. Softdisk had to be kept out of the loop, which meant working on this from home on their own time. They also had to obtain computers to use at home. Once again, they put their brains to work and came up with the perfect solution. Over the weekend, they borrowed the company's PCs. They videotaped a playthrough of Super Mario Bros. 3 so they could pause and replicate everything on the screen. They consumed huge quantities of pizza, burgers, hot dogs, and caffeine. Most importantly, they finished their demo. They were playing Super Mario Bros. 3 on a PC, and in the early morning, before anyone else showed up, the PCs were back in the office. The demo made its way to Nintendo, who then replied back within a few weeks. The response they got was disappointing, but it's a policy that remains unchanged for Nintendo to this very day. Nintendo will never release their intellectual property onto a platform other than their own. This was disappointing to the team, especially after their weekend marathon to make the demo. Not all hope was lost because John Romero had a plan B. While all of this was happening, Scott Miller from Apogee Software was trying to contact John Romero. This was regarding the next game we'll take a look at, Pyramids of Egypt. This is also one of his earlier Apple II games ported to the PC. You take control of Mike the Explorer, collecting gems in the numerous pyramid chambers, all while avoiding deadly snakes. Once all the gems are collected, you get to the exit and you move on to the next level. You defend yourself against the snakes by setting fire to them. The snakes respawn after a few seconds in a random location in the level. I found it really odd that you can only set a fire if there's a wall on the bottom left or bottom right of your location. Keep in mind, this game is shown from a top-down perspective. There's no jumping mechanics or gravity in effect, so this makes no sense to me whatsoever. The controls don't feel very responsive. If you press the arrow keys or the spacebar too quickly, your character does nothing. A lot of times, I die because of that. Setting a fire is also a chore, not only with its nonsensical rules, but the unresponsive controls also leads to a horrible death. At least there's some redeeming element to dying. The death animation has you spurting out blood and dying in agony. The graphics were well done for what was available at the time. Some of you may not realize this, but the game only uses 4 colors. Softdisk's policy at the time was for the games to be compatible with 4-color CGA graphics, but Romero used a trick to swap the colors on a system capable of using EGA graphics. The game's theme goes well with the red and yellow colors, but the annoyances far outweigh the eye candy. The random movements of the snakes means there will be times when you're waiting forever for them to move somewhere else. There's supposedly 100 levels to get through, but very few people will have the patience to get through them all. The game in general is not really worth playing anymore. The amount of frustration generated by this game will put off even the most avid retro gamers. It's a game that has aged poorly, but this game was good enough for its time to catch Scott Miller's attention. With the growth of the PC market in many parts of the world, programmers were in high demand, and with that, the software industry became notorious for poaching talent from other companies. Some managers became so paranoid that they began reading their employees' mail, listening in on their conversations, and essentially spied on them. To hide his identity, Miller sent Romero a few fan letters, each pretending to be from different children who played his games, but always leaving the same address. Romero was happy to know he had fans willing to show their appreciation for his work. That is, until he read an article on Scott Miller in PC Games magazine. He finally realized it. There was one thing in common with his fans and Scott Miller. They were all Scott Miller. Romero was pissed off. But once he heard Miller's business proposal, he turned that frown upside down. Scott Miller wanted to publish his games as shareware. This was a distribution model that revolved around sharing software free of charge and then asking for payments in exchange for support and updates. This type of business cut out the big publishers and retailers, allowing for higher profits at a lower price. People who created shareware utility programs were very successful. Game programmers were not. The reason behind this is something that still applies today. Gamers are lazy. If they have a copy of the full game, what else is there to pay for? Why go out of your way to spend your money on nothing? Scott Miller realized this and adapted a tweaked version of the shareware model. Instead of releasing the entire game for free and hoped to earn money, he gave away a small portion, got people addicted, and have them purchase the rest of the game. When the games are split into several episodes, this becomes the perfect solution. A single episode is much easier to distribute over bulletin board systems than a full game, and people can legally make as many copies as they want. If the game is good enough, people will buy the entire thing. So all the team needed to do is create a killer game for the PC, and this is where it all began. This is not the entire story, but a simple prologue to introduce the key players involved. John Carmack created the game engines that ran the games, John Romero made the tools to create the levels, Tom Hall laid out the story, characters, and game design, and Adrian Carmack did all the graphics. By their powers combined, they would create the game development studio that would revolutionize the video game industry.